Hello everyone, my name is Rancy and I'm Support Escalation Engineer here at Microsoft. Today we're going to discuss about troubleshooting of SharePoint Online permissions, sharing and storage issues. This session comprises understanding of SharePoint Online site storage and analysis of sharing permissions with troubleshooting scenarios. Let's get started. Today, our session is mostly divided into three parts, as you may have easily guessed, looking at the title of the presentation. We will start with storage, wherein we'll talk about tenant, site collection, and OneDrive storage, post which we will look at a few common issues that we often receive on storage. Next, we'll delve into permissions in SharePoint. We'll talk about various aspects that relates to permissioning in SharePoint, starting with concept of authorization, permission levels, permission inheritance, and so on. We'll end this section with a talk on how to troubleshoot permission issues, which are quite common in SharePoint Online. Finally, we will be talking about sharing concepts in OneDrive and SharePoint Online, and we'll also look at troubleshooting sharing issues. Like I said, we will end this session with answering any questions that you may have during Q&A. All right, so let's get started with so looking at the tenant storage. As you can see on your screens, I have highlighted a few points that we must all know about tenant storage. Firstly, as an administrator, we must all understand how is tenant storage calculated for any SharePoint Online tenant. You can see the formula. It is pretty simple. It's 1 terabyte multiplied by 10 gigabytes per user license for almost all the subscriptions except M365 F1 and F3 subscription. For these subscription, they get fixed storage of 1 terabytes. So let's say, I have a SharePoint Online tenant in which I have 10,000 user license. And let's assume that for this tenant, we purchased E3 subscription, which is Enterprise 3 subscription. Then how would the calculation happen for tenant storage for the SharePoint Online tenant that this company would have? So the calculation would be 1 terabytes plus 10,000 multiplied by 10 gigabytes per user license. So that would amount to about 101 terabytes of storage. So this SharePoint Online tenant would have 101 terabytes of storage. Now, as we all know that, SharePoint Online and OneDrive is very, very widely used, and people, often keep on putting their content in SharePoint Online. So the storage may not be sufficient that any company may get at times with, this calculation. So we do have facilities where an extra storage can be purchased, and that once purchased would add up to the total tenant storage as well. Now, we must also know, in fact, that which site collections would consume tenant storage. So all the team site collections, such as Office 365 group sites, team sites, all of these sites would consume storage from total tenant storage. It is just the OneDrive site storage that does not count against the tenant storage, and storage for OneDrive sites are allocated separately. We will certainly, like I mentioned during agenda, that we will talk about OneDrive storage in a few minutes. Okay, so moving on. Now let's look at site collection storage. We already understood that team sites, their storage gets pulled up from tenant storage. Now, as administrators, we can decide whether we want to allocate fixed storage to site collections, or we want storage to be automatic allocation. So as you can see on your screen, I have given screenshot of both classic admin center and modern admin center, where we get that option to select manual versus automatic storage allocation. Now, we all understand what is manual allocation. It essentially indicates that the administrator would assign fixed storage quota to their sites. On the contrary, automatic allocation would enable sites to expand storage based on the usage automatically, right? Meaning the storage would increase on the go. And this option is one of the widely used options as it eradicates the need to maintain storage quota, especially as we all are aware that the number of site collections that get created in any tenant is growing by the day. All right. So let's look at storage management in classic SharePoint Admin Center when it comes to manual allocation. You can see that I've listed out site collection page. On the active site, on the active site collection page, you would see all the sites listed out along with the storage used and the limit that was allocated. Additionally, if any administrator decides to create a new site for manual allocation, they would see this option to set storage quota for the new site collection. For existing sites, the sites can be site can be selected, go to properties, and you would see everything related to storage, such as what is the storage consumption, what is the usage, what is the quota that was allocated, and what's the warning level set for that site collection storage. And also, storage quota can be changed by selecting the site collection, clicking on storage quota, and as an admin, you would be able to change storage quota allocation for that site collection when it's set to manual storage limit. All right. Now let's look at manual storage allocation in the modern admin center, because that's the way to go. So under the, it's quite similar to the classic. So you go to active sites, you would see all the sites listed out along with the storage used column. But if you want to check it for any specific site collection, just select the site and then just go to ellipse and you would see storage. And in that, you can just go and change the storage quota for that site collection, as well as the warning limit, of course. And then if you want to check what is the use storage, exact use storage in MB, so just click on the site. It would take you to this dialog, which will default to general tab. Switch your tab to activity, and you would see storage usage column that would show you the exact storage that's being used in that particular site collection. So some of you would be aware about storage metrics, right? It's a go-to place for any administrator, site collection administrator, who is interested in finding out, the detailed storage usage or consumption in that particular site. So as you can see on the screen, this storage metrics option is available under site collection administration. And so obviously, this can be only accessed by the site collection admin and not even by site owner. So once you click on it, you would be directed to storage metrics page, wherein you can see what is the consumption of that site. So in this case, this particular site has consumed around 1.3 gigabytes of storage, and around 122 gigs is free. You would also be able to figure out what are those libraries or subsites which are consuming, higher storage. So you can easily, go do checks on those, libraries or subsites. And not only that, you can just drill down further to even figure out which is that file, which is of large size. And note that this also includes version of all the files, right? Now, just one point that I would like to highlight here is that if we have chosen as our storage allocation as automatic allocation, you would see that this storage consumption would be calculated or shown you against 25 TB, because it's automatic allocation, and that's is because, if any one of you have already guessed, it's because the 25 TB is the limitation. It's a hard limit for any particular site. No site collection in SharePoint Online can go beyond that storage. So, but that does not mean that that site gets 25 TB, right? It would be pooled, of course, against the total tenant storage, which is allocated, which we looked a while back. Okay, now, I'm sure as administrators, we must have come across a requirement or a need to get, a report, right? A report of, what is the consumption made by sites, or we want to figure out which sites are like large sites so that we can, sort of understand what to do with those sites if you want to do some cleanup, etc., any other activity. So the good news is that we do have a way to get that report pretty easily from the user interface itself. So no PowerShell, nothing, just from the interface. So what basically needs to be done is tenant admin needs to go to M365 portal via office.com and then just go to usage, and it will show you a lot of options. So just select SharePoint files. Under SharePoint files, you would see view more. Once you click on view more, it will show you activities against SharePoint files, right? It will default to this activity tab. You may have to switch the tab from activity to site usage. And then when you switch your tab, you would see there is this report which shows you all the site collection URLs along with number of files and storage used. And you can easily export this as CSV, and you can just review which site, how much consumption, what files, and everything, what number of files. You would be able to figure that out from this report. Isn't that going to be helpful, right, for figuring out what's going on in the tenant with respect to site collections? Now, this brings us to the topic of OneDrive storage. I have noted a few points, as you can see on the screen, when it comes to understanding about OneDrive storage. Firstly, we must all know by default that all the users with most subscriptions, right, except O365 Enterprise F3, M365 F1, and F3, they all get default of 1 terabyte. But these F1 and F3 licenses, they get fixed storage of 2 gigabytes only. Now, administrators can easily increase the default storage for any other subscription except F1 and F3 for any particular user, or even at the tenant level, up to 5 TB. They can do it by themselves. I'm sure some of you are aware about this already. But what if there is a user that has consumed or used 90% of their 5 TB of OneDrive storage? Then in that case, you might have to reach out to Microsoft, and we would increase the quota, post which as admins, you would be able to increase quota for that user. And one last point over here that we need to know about OneDrive storage here is what if the OneDrive storage for any user is nearing the capacity of 90% of 25 TB? I'll be honest, I've come across this quite rarely, but it's not that something which has not been raised yet. So in that case, you would still have to reach out to Microsoft, and we would allocate additional cloud storage of 25 TB so that a team site can be provisioned for that user so that they can use that site for this storage. Now, why is 25 TB limit enforced? I think you might have guessed it, which I just spoke a few minutes ago, is because any SharePoint site collection has hard limit of 25 TB. We cannot go storing anything beyond 25 TB. And OneDrive site is, of course, essentially a SharePoint site. That's why it has to abide by the same limitation. Okay, so how can the default OneDrive storage be changed by tenant admins for all the users? So we'll speak about the tenant level, and then we'll speak about the user level. So for changing the OneDrive storage for all the users, all that needs to be done by tenant admin is they have to go to OneDrive Admin Center, go to storage, and they would see this option where they can set the default storage. Like I mentioned, it is defaulted to always 1 TB, but it can be increased up till 5 TB. And the minimum limit, of course, is 1 GB. You cannot go below 1 GB. So minimum 1 GB can be allocated and maximum 5 TB. And the same operation you can even do with PowerShell using set-spo tenant. Parameter is OneDrive Storage quota, and you have to give quota. Note that this quota is in megabytes, which means if I want to set to 2 TB, it's going to be 2048,000, and that would translate to 2 terabytes. We would be, sharing handouts with you, and in that I would ensure that these PowerShell commands are listed out along with, the parameters, so that you're aware which PowerShell commands needs to be executed under which scenarios. All right, so let's look at how can default OneDrive storage be changed at user level. That this operation can also be done from both the UI, which is user interface, and also the PowerShell. So let's start looking with the UI. So what needs to be done is that the tenant administrator needs to go to the portal, office.com, and go under active user, look for the user, and then once you click on the user, it will default to account tab, show you all the information about that user. But then you have to switch the tab to OneDrive, and there it would show you storage used. It would show you percentage of storage against the total storage. And then just below that, you would see edit button. Just click on that, and then there you would see two options. If you want to set it same as what has been defaulted for the entire tenant, or you want to change it for this particular user. And just if you want to change for this particular user, just use the second radio button and change it. Again, the same operation can be done with PowerShell. This time for the user, you have to use set-spo site, give identity parameter, and the URL is the OneDrive URL of the user. And storage quota, again, it needs to be in MB, megabytes. So in this case, again, it's 2 TB. So this is how we can change OneDrive storage at the user level. Okay, so here's what I've listed out, a few common storage issues that, we must have encountered, at some point of time while administrating SharePoint Online tenant, right? So the first issue that we see is about site is running out of storage, which is a site collection running out of storage. And you would see that there is a red color bar which says no free space, and then that indicates obviously that this would stop users or prohibit users from uploading new files or working with files, or sort of go in a blocked scenario. And the obvious way to get around this is either increase the storage limit of the site in case it was set to manual, or else clear the items from the site, library, or even recycle bin. That's the first place that we recommend to start with for clearing out unwanted large files, but worth checking other libraries as well. Now, one pointer that I would like to highlight here is that if, now that we are often using Compliance Center, if there is any retention hold, which is applied on the site, so that can also lead to increased storage consumption or any site collection. Because, as we know, when we delete, if the site is on hold, and if we edit or delete any file in the site, the deleted file would go to recycle bin, and a copy of it would be made in the preservation hold library. Now, recycle bins can be cleaned up, but when it comes to preservation hold library, until the item gets until there, it reaches the expiry date, the preservation hold library would not clear up that item. So this is something which we should be, mindful about, to check if, the site is on hold or not, and to be wise enough to decide whether we want to put retention hold on a particular site collection or not. Now, next common issue that we often come across is when a tenant is running out of storage. Again, there are two ways to get around this. First is obvious, that delete unwanted sites or items in the large sites. And how do we get large sites? We can look at the reports that we looked at a while ago and just figure out what can be deleted so that storage is cleared out. Or else the other option is obviously to purchase additional storage, if clearing is not helping out. And that brings us to the next common issue that we've often, worked on, wherein the purchase storage does not reflect under total tenant storage. So I would like to highlight here that the change that, let's say, if I purchase tenant storage today, it may happen anytime within 24 hours. And it may be instantaneous in a few minutes, or it can go it can be done anywhere within 24 hours, right? Now, we recommend all our customers to wait for at least 24 hours for the tenant storage to get updated in case of purchasing tenant storage, before reaching out to Microsoft. Now, if it has exceeded 24 hours, then yes, you can reach out to Microsoft and we'll do the checks from our end. Now, another one not so common issue that we have seen is that customers have cleared data, or they have deleted data from their site, but they don't see any change in their storage metrics. So let's say that I have this manual allocation, or maybe my site is consuming about 10 gigabytes, and I cleared about 2 gigs of storage of data. I just deleted it, and I expect that it should now show me 8 gigs, but that change does not happen. Then in that case, also we recommend for waiting for 24 hours. If despite 24 hours the storage metrics does not update that information, then please engage with Microsoft and we'll do further checks and we'll take necessary actions. Okay, so at times we have also come across scenarios wherein the OneDrive storage for a user who has the right license, right? Let's assume they have a business plan or enterprise plan, so they should at least be seeing default of 1 TB, but instead of that they see 2 gigs. And despite taking all the measures, the storage does not increase for the user. Now, in such case, one of the common issues that we have come across, that we've figured so far, is that the user might have multiple licenses assigned, wherein one of the plans that is assigned to the user may have SharePoint Deskless assigned to it. And because of SharePoint Deskless license, it leads to 2 gigabytes of storage. Again, the solution here is that we recommend admins to unassign that SharePoint Deskless from the plan, and then then they might have to wait. Now, when it comes to storage quota changes, especially in OneDrive sites, license change does not enable the storage to change. It will only happen after the user accesses their OneDrive site. So after they've accessed their OneDrive site, post that, the quota change that's requested would get queued up for the timer job that's responsible to do all this activity, to process it. And after that, after 24 hours, that change takes place. And therefore, we recommend for all of these 3 scenarios where there is a site collection storage not reflecting, change not reflecting, or tenant storage change not reflecting, or even OneDrive storage change not reflecting despite user has logged into the OneDrive site, the minimum wait time that we recommend is 24 hours. And then, we will do the checks and we'll take actions to ensure this is sorted out. But this is not something which is common. It's rare scenarios where the storage quota updates won't happen. Okay, so with this, we finish up with the storage topic. And now let's look at the permissions in SharePoint Online, right? We'll start with the permission topic now. Now, when it comes to permissioning in SharePoint Online, broadly, there are 3 concepts: authentication, authorization, and permissions. Now, what is authentication? I'm sure most of us know this, right? Because we're working with O365. Authentication is a process where, simplistically, it's just a process of verifying users' identity. In case of SharePoint Online, authentication is performed against Azure AD or on-premise Active Directory in case of single sign-on. So, it's one of the vast topic in itself, but briefly, once a user is authenticated by the respective identity provider, SharePoint would generate 2 cookies, namely FedAuth cookie, which is Federation Authentication cookie, and RTFA cookie. Now, fed-out cookie is for all the top-level site collections. And what are those top-level site collections? Like root site collection, OneDrive site collection, and admin center. These are like top-level sites. So for this, fed-out cookie would be generated. And then there is a RTFA cookie, which is root federation auth cookie. And that is for enabling the silent authentication of user when they're accessing resources in SharePoint, such as, they might user might be accessing a document or page, a site. So when they're accessing anything in SharePoint, they won't be prompted for putting their credential each time. Just imagine a scenario where we didn't have RTFA cookie. So each time as a user, if I'm accessing anything in SharePoint Online and it asks me to authenticate, well, that experience wouldn't be so awesome. So RTFA cookie is a cookie which plays an essential role for enabling silent authentication. All right, so that's about authentication. But now when it comes to authorization, so once the user is authenticated, we need to check the authorization. What's authorization? It is just to check that whether the user is allowed to access a particular SharePoint object or not, right? Whether, because not everything we must, we must remember one thing about SharePoint is that it is everything is secured within SharePoint. So no one can access any object in SharePoint unless they have authorization to do so, unless they have permissions to do so, right? So that brings us to the topic of permission. So it is the permission that we would give to a user or a group of user on an object in SharePoint that would facilitate authorization. So let's say if I have a page, then and I have a user A, I need to ensure that if user A wants to access page 1, then they need to have some sort of permission to be able to access page 1. So now, as we know, anything that can be done in SharePoint sites by user can be performed only if user has permission. That's why permission is one of a very important topic, and we'll be discussing in length about more areas within permission itself in some time. Okay, so this diagram that you see on your screen, it represents the security hierarchy in SharePoint Online. So you see on the left-hand side, we have users, and we have also indicated group of users. It can be, again, by this group that you see here could be Active Directory group, right? And then we have users, and then these users and the Active Directory security groups can be collated. They can be a SharePoint group which can be created with these users and AD security groups, and then permission levels are assigned to these users or Active Directory groups or SharePoint groups. A permission level is assigned to them so that they can access anything within SharePoint. Now, this permission level we'll discuss in a bit, but they are basically, you can think of it like group of various permissions within SharePoint. Permissions like, what are permissions? Let's say we want to allow user wants to do some task, right? They want to open an item or delete a site. All of these are fine-grained permissions. So these permissions make up permission levels, and that is assigned to objects. We'll look at secureable object in next slide. So this permission level is assigned to the user or the group of user or SharePoint groups to these objects. So that enables these users to be able to access these objects. All right, let's look at what are secureable objects, right? So secureable objects are the actual objects on which the users or the group of users are assigned permissions to. We just looked in a while back. So what are these objects and why are we calling them secureable objects? These objects can be anything from site collection to subsites to lists or libraries. They can be items, documents, folders. All of these are various objects within SharePoint. Now, why are they called secureable objects? Because like we just spoke about, nothing in SharePoint can be accessed if a user does not have permission to that object. So they are secured. That's why we term it also as secureable object. And so the easiest way to give permission to user on the securable object can also be by just doing, making or creating a sharing link. And we'll also discuss about sharing as we move on with this presentation. All right, so that gets us to the topic of permissions. Now, we looked at permission levels, wherein we saw that there are a group of permissions that would make permission level. Now, permissions are inherently what can be actually performed on an object. For example, opening a document, creating a user, deleting a site, or creating a page. All of these are actually permissions. And you can see on your screen, there are 33 permissions in SharePoint by default, right? Of course, we cannot create a custom permission, but these are the 33 permissions, and they're broadly classified or categorized into 3 categories: list permissions, site permissions, and personal permissions. List permissions would enable, or list permissions, the permissions that are related to list-related operations are all grouped into list permission category. And whatever that can be performed at site level with the site object is categorized with site permission, and the permissions that is for the user is under the personal permissions. Now, this is, I just wanted to, give you a glance of all of these 33 permissions and how they're categorized, right? List permissions would have all list-related operations, site with site-related operations, and then personal, like personal views, personal web paths, are under personal permissions. In the handouts that we will share out, I will ensure that there is a link that we would put for these permissions, and that that article is one of the excellent article that describes about what are these permissions. It also in detail, and then it also describes what are the dependencies. So, for example, if I want to do edit item, maybe I need an additional or a related permission to also be added to the permission level, because without that, maybe edit items may not work. It could be add items, right? So all of these dependencies are also listed out in that article. Okay, so I hope permissions is clear. And now let's talk about what is permission level. We looked at it when we were looking at the security hierarchy, that it is a permission level that is assigned to a user or the group, right? So the ability to view, change, or manage a site is determined by the permission level that we would assign to the user. It is the permission level that controls all the permission for the site or its child objects that inherit from the site permission. And so one thing that we must all remember is that permissions can never be directly assigned to a user or a group. It is only the permission level that can be assigned. So if you want some permission to be assigned to the user, we'll have to create a permission level if it's not helping with the default permission levels. And we will have to then add that permission to that permission level. Like we discussed, that the permission levels are made up of permissions. So without appropriate permission levels, user will not be able to perform the task that we want them to perform. Or maybe, if we give them a permission level that would enable them to perform something which we don't want them to perform. Like, for example, that I added a user to full control, whereas I wanted to, or a owners group, but I wanted them to be part of members group, right? So what would that enable that user to do? They would be able to work with navigation settings, right? But they shouldn't be able to, because I wanted them to be just a member, not an owner. So we have to be mindful about what permission levels are being assigned to which user. All right, so can you think about what are the default permission levels? So we know what is permission level now, but and I'm sure you might have seen these default permission levels that are already there in SharePoint. right? So we'll have a look in a while, but if you can, I think you might be already thinking about it. So read permission level, full control permission level. These are the permission levels, and a few of them, which we'll discuss in a bit, are the default permission levels. Full control permission level is the only permission level that has all the 33 permissions assigned to it. And no other permission level has all the permissions assigned. And that's why, site owners can do pretty much everything within that site. All right, so these are the default permission levels that are available in SharePoint Online. So let's start with the read permission level. So read permission level would enable users to view the documents or items. And in case of documents, they would be even able to download documents. They would not be able to edit or contribute anything, but they would be able to view the items and even download them. And there is a similar permission level if we don't want the users to be able to download anything, we just want them to strictly just view, then view only is the permission level. It allows users to view items, but it won't permit them to download them. The next one is contribute permission level. This would allow users to do pretty much anything with the list item. It applies at the list item level. So they would be able to create new items or add new items. They would be able to view items, of course, update them, edit them, or even delete them. And this permission level, like I said, is operational on list item level. The next permission level is edit, very similar to contribute. It does everything that a contribute can do. But additionally, it also has permissions for working with lists. So the user would be able to edit the list and even delete them. So it's list item plus contributing at list items and list as well. So that's edit. It's you can think of it as a higher level than the contribute. And then comes the design permission level. It would basically enable user to do anything along with edit, and it would also allow users to approve items or work with their layouts or even work with the SharePoint designer. So all of that can be achieved by just giving design permission level to a particular user. And then, of course, we have talked about full control, needs no explanation. It has all the 33 permissions assigned to it. So that gets us to the next topic of custom permission level, as we have already looked at default permission level. Now, custom permission level. So as administrators, for more precise control, we might need that, we might find a need to configure custom permission level on our SharePoint assets. But, like, for example, I want user to be able to not delete an item, right? So maybe I want them to add an item, but maybe not delete an item. So that permission level is by default not there, because we just looked at the default permission level. So that would get us to the need of creating a custom permission level. So custom permission level is basically a set of permission that we identify that we want user to do, and then we assign a group of user or user with that permission level to a particular object, so that they can do that customized operation only, right? So how can custom permission level be created? So one way to create permission level, which is obvious, is to create from scratch. So we go to the permissions, go to permission level, and then just click on new and keep on adding the permissions. Now this is the way which an admin can use if they are really quite aware of all the 33 permissions that are there. One of the other easiest way to create a custom permission level is to create a copy of an existing permission level, and then work with that copied permission level. And the third way that a custom permission level can be created is by modifying the existing default permission level. Now that's not so recommended approach because we don't recommend touching any of the default permission levels. Now, one thing that since we are on this point, that I would like to highlight is the full control permission level is one of the permission levels that cannot be modified. Maybe you might see option to modify, contribute, or read, not recommended approach, but full control, you would not even see that option to modify it. So the recommended approach is either create from scratch or create a copy of an existing default permission level, and then just work with that copied permission level. Okay, so in case of this example that I took about, wherein we want user to add items, but not delete items. So basically what we can do here is we can just, copy contribute permission level and then just remove the delete items from it. And that would enable us to, work with this scenario. All right, so that gets us to the next topic of SharePoint groups. Now, SharePoint groups are essentially a container that can contain individual users or Active Directory security groups. And of course, they provide the most convenient way to assign permission level on objects in SharePoint. So not to say, but it's obvious that the need of SharePoint group is that when we want to assign multiple users so that they can access objects in SharePoint, so that we don't go through the hassle of assigning each individual user permission. So we just create a group of users, keep on adding them to the group, so that they automatically get the respective permissions. Now, many times we have come across or we have seen that the administrators choose to assign permission levels directly to security group, but we recommend that you use SharePoint groups instead of Active Directory groups, because then the changes whatever you would like to do to those group of users or their permissions on a certain object, you can just do it with that SharePoint group, because it's confined to that site collection, won't impact the entire Active Directory group. Now, one other thing that we should know about SharePoint group is that we cannot create nested SharePoint groups, right? Like in Active Directory, we can create Active Directory security group, we can create nested security groups, but that's something which cannot be done with SharePoint groups. All right, so let's look at some of the default SharePoint groups that get created. I'm sure most of you who have worked with SharePoint have seen it. So when a site collection gets created, these three groups would always get created. The site visitors, site members, site owners have also given what are the default permission levels that are assigned to these groups. So site visitors have read permission level assigned to it. Site members have edit permission level, and site owners are the full control users. So pretty much they can do everything in the SharePoint site. Things such as they can work with the permissions of the SharePoint site, which members and visitors cannot work with. They can add multiple, additional web paths, or they can even work with controlling the navigation, adding new navigation controls. All of that can be done with site owners, but not with members or visitors. Similarly, members can do a lot of things with list items and lists themselves. So they can create, update, contribute, delete even, but visitors are just restricted to do sort of read or view only operations. Okay, so we saw that the default SharePoint groups get created when the site collection is created, and then default permissions are assigned to them. But many a times we might come across scenarios where default SharePoint groups may not help. Right? We might find the need of creating custom groups. So let's say that I have a site wherein there are all the company users, or such you can think of it like everyone except external user. Active Directory group is a part of visitors group, and assume that there is a library where there are some project documentation which would be stored, and so the requirement is that only the individuals who are part of the project or project members should be able to access this library. no other users should be able to even see this library. So in this case, we definitely find that custom SharePoint group is going to help us out, because, as we know that a visitor groups has all the company users. So what we would essentially do is that we would create a custom SharePoint group, add those project members to the group, and then, just give, let's say, contribute permission level to those to that SharePoint group, and assign it to that library by breaking the permission on that library, so that only this group of users have contribute permission on the library and no one else. And that brings us to the topic of permission inheritance, because we just spoke about that we would be assigning this contribute permission level to this custom project members group, and to that library only. So this would require permission inheritance to be broken on the library, since we want just this group to access the library. So what exactly is permission inheritance? It is literally the word, it gives the meaning in the word itself, right? That it means that permission at parent level, and what is a parent, the site collection, would flow down as it is to the child objects. And what are the child objects of site collection? Of course, there is subsite, lists, libraries, any apps that are added. All of these are child objects of the site collection. So they are, by default, they would inherit the permissions. At least the list and the libraries would always inherit the permission from from the parent site object. Now, you must have observed, some of you may have observed while working with subsites in SharePoint Online, that when we create a subsite, it offers us to decide whether we want permission to be inherited in the subsite from the parent, or we want unique permission. So basically what we would be doing, if we say unique permission, we would be breaking the permission inheritance from the parent side. So a permission inheritance on any securable object. What a securable object? Any list item, document, folder, list, library, or subsite. When it is broken, then we call those permissions either as unique permissions, or we also sometimes term it as fine-grained permissions. Right. So if any child object's permission is modified, the permission inheritance would get broken, and then that would lead that child object to become a parent object. So let's understand a bit about it more. Let's assume that I have a library on which user has read permission. Right. All the users, or whichever users are part of that site, and libraries inheriting from that site, they have read permission, or they are part of the visitors group. Now we want a folder to be added to that library that would allow only some set of users to contribute to that folder, and only to that specific folder. So what would we do in this scenario? We would break permission inheritance on the folder. We will add those users either individually, or maybe create a group of those users and add that group to that folder with the contribute permission level. So now any file that would get created within this folder, for those files, folder would be the parent of the of those files, right? So all the files would have contribute permission level for those set of users, and they would no more, the files will no more consider library as a parent. For those files within that specific folder, it will be the folder. So folder has now become the new parent for those files, because we had broken the permission inheritance from the library. Now, if you think this is confusing, or you have any questions, please do note it, and we'll discuss this more in the Q&A about this permission inheritance. Okay, so let's talk about check permissions. Now, if we spoke about fine-grained permissions or unique permissions, now if we have a site on which we have unique permissions that are set on several objects, then it can become a nightmare for the administrators. And I think a few of us might have gone through this. And so this arises a need to investigate what user have access to and to what object. So to find that out, to help us with troubleshooting and investigating these permission issues, one of the function that we use is check permissions, wherein we try to figure out the user or the group has what permission, what set of permissions on that particular object. So how do we access this? We go to any site or library or any object folder also for that matter, or library or the file, sorry, and go to the settings of the file and click on check permissions. Once we click on check permissions, you would see this dialog which would have, which would offer you to put in the user or the group of user, and then click on check now. This would list out all the effective permissions for that particular user or the group. Now, one pointer that I would like to highlight here is that if the user is given direct access to any object, then it would really populate very easily. But if the user is given access to any object via a security group, and they have not, and the user has not actually accessed the site, then user may not appear when you try to populate the user under user and group. So if the user is added via security group and has never accessed the site, they may not come up. So the obvious solution to this would be that user needs to access the site so that they so their name gets populated over here. And this depends on one of the hidden lists, which we'll discuss in a while. All right, so let's talk about limited access. We have seen default permission levels, but we did not talk about limited access permission level till now. And I'm very certain that many of us working with SharePoint have seen this permission, on various users that are assigned to users. So what exactly is limited access role or permission level? So first thing to know about this permission level is that it's not visible when you go and check the default permission levels from the permission settings page. So it's basically a hidden permission level. It's hidden from the user interface, and it only gets assigned to the user on subsite or list or folder level when the user is given a fine-grained permission on the list item or the document. Now, the primary reason that this permission level even exists is that in order to enable user to access any list items such as folder, let's say, they would have to traverse through the site and then go to the library or the list and then reach out to the folder, right? So like we understood that every object is a securable object. So they need to have some permission on, it won't allow user unless it has some permission on that object. So that's why limited access is given on site and list or library level so that folder can be accessed. Now let's talk about a feature that impacts limited access role. It's called as limited access lockdown feature. It's a site collection feature, and by default, it is disabled on all the sites so that we allow users with limited access to access objects in SharePoint. But at times, administrators may enable this feature for some purpose, and this leads the removal of two permissions from this permission level, which is browse user info and use remote APIs. And this can lead users to get access denied. If you're working with access denied on folders issue with any particular user, as an administrators, I think it's worthwhile to check whether this feature, limited access lockdown mode, is enabled or disabled, and then carry on from there. All right. Now, moving ahead, let's talk about custom script. Now, this is another feature in SharePoint Online that was introduced a few years back in SharePoint Online with the intent to let users add or work with scripts, or even block them from working with scripts for that matter. Even the administrators, the site collection administrators, can be prohibited from making changes to certain features in site collection if custom script is disabled or it is prevented. Now, it's worth noting that by default, the custom script feature is allowed on the sites that are created by administrators like Global Admin or SharePoint Service Admin. If they create sites by themselves, this feature would be allowed. But if on OneDrive sites, modern or group sites, communication sites, and of course the root site collection, this feature is disabled. And it can be enabled or disabled. It can be toggled easily from both user interface and PowerShell. So if we look at the user interface, all that the admin needs to do is go to SharePoint Admin Center, go to settings, go to classic settings if you're in the modern interface, and then click on look for custom script, and then you can change the settings. The first one is for personal sites, and the second one is for the user created sites. And if you want to make the changes at particular site level, then set-spo site command can be used by giving the site URL of that site collection, and use the parameter deny, add, and customize pages. Set that to 0 or $false, and this would enable custom script on that particular URL on that particular site. Okay, let's look at some features that get impacted with custom script, which is set to prevented or disabled. So these are one of top 5 lists. Like if this feature is set to disabled, it's not allowed custom script on a site, then the admins and of course the users will not see save site as a template, or save list or library as a template, solution gallery, theme gallery, SharePoint designer. These would not be available for usage, and there's many more features that get impacted with custom script. I would share documentation on this, and that would list out all the features that gets impacted, but these are top 5 features that we often use, so these definitely get impacted if custom script is not allowed on a particular site collection. Okay, now let's talk about user information list. Since we have been talking about permission, so it is imperative that we talk about user information list. Some of you might already know or may have heard about it. User information list is a hidden list, and it is there because it stores metadata about the user, such as username, email address, the PUID, which is the unique ID for the user, title, and many more things related to that user or the security group. Now, why is it needed? You would have seen on various SharePoint objects, such as list items or documents or folders, you would have seen created by, modified by. These metadata fields fetch information of the user from the user information list. So the moment we assign any permission to a user, the user gets added to the user information list, and also the security groups. However, if a user is added to the site via a security group, not really directly, then users information will be added to this list only if the user accesses the site collection. We spoke about it, right, when we were looking at check permissions. This is the reason, because unless the user who is added via the security group, not directly, unless they access the site, their entry will not be added to the user information list, and hence check permission cannot resolve the user. User information list is also used at times for by people picker as well. Now, it is also worth noting that user information list is scoped at site collection level, which means it is stored at site collection level and not at any subsite level. Yes, we can access it by giving subsite URL, and then this URL, which is underscore layout, WAC permission, people.aspx, WAC permission group ID equal to 0. But whatever changes that you make to the user in this list is actually happening at site collection level, not really at subsite level. So like I said, it's a hidden list. So the only way to access it is give the site collection URL. And then after the URL, let's say my site collection is domain.sharepoint.com, whack sites, whack test. Then I would do whack test whack underscore layout whack 15 whack people.aspx whack membership group ID equal to 0, and this should show me the user information list. Now, some of us may know that user information list is often accessed when we have to correct issues with the users, right? Because that's what this list is used for storing users' metadata. We may delete user from user information list, give the permission to the user all over again, and we might see some issues getting corrected. However, this step needs to be done very cautiously, since this would remove permission of the user wherever they had permission in past, right? So if the user was having any fine-grained permission anywhere, so that would be removed, and that needs to be noted. So that's why if this operation is being performed, this should be done only if you're certain that doesn't matter, you can give permission again to the user. Okay. All right, so that's about user information list. Now let's talk a bit about modern sites and group sites, since we are all aware that modern sites and group sites are group connected sites, and they differ. They don't hugely differ in permissions, but we must know, how they differ when it comes to permissions from the classic team sites. So the key difference is that the groups, they get group roles, and I'm sure you would have seen this, group owners and group members. So these group roles, they get added to certain SharePoint groups. For example, group owner gets added to site collection admin, and group members, they get added to site members group. And if it's a public group, then it gets added to the site visitors. And then there are two ways that the security can be managed on the SharePoint group. One is that it can be managed for the entire group along with all the sites and assets, or the other way the security can be managed is only for that SharePoint site, so the group itself will not get impacted with permissions. I would like to also highlight, or would like you to note this point, that we cannot add Active Directory groups in Office 365 group security. Only user accounts are allowed. All right. Now, this brings us to the topic of how we can narrow down permission issues in SharePoint Online, because permission issues honestly can be at times very easy to resolve, but at times they can be extremely tricky to crack. So I have listed out a few questions that we must find answers to when we are working on permission issue. Maybe they would help us to resolve, or maybe at least these answer to these questions would help us to narrow down the issue at least. So the first information that is imperative to be gathered is, of course, the URL of that resource or that item or that object that is being accessed, on which the user is encountering access denied issue. The other point that can be noted or found out about is whether it is just a single user issue, it's impacting multiple or certain set of users, or it's impacting all the users. If it's impacting just one particular or a set of user or few users, then it's worth to note UPNs of those users, and then find out what are their permissions on that object. As an admin, you would be able to do that. And then how would you find what permissions is there on that resource? Yes, we spoke about it using check permissions, right? So figure out from check permission that what permissions are being are listed out, what effective permissions are being listed out for that user on that resource. Figure out if it's a licensed user or not. Then the other thing that we do, you might have seen Microsoft support checking that whether the user is able to access any application pages or not. Now, what are these application pages? The site settings page, list settings, library settings, any page which is created, which cannot be modified by the, even the admins. They are they were created for, for application management purpose only, those are application pages. So check whether the user is able to access at least a site contents page or not, and then check if site collection admin is able to reproduce the same problem, because if it's the site collection admin also not able to access a resource, then there is something else going on, right? No, not scope to just user level, because even the admin is impacted. And then try to figure out if there are any customization on the site. We have often seen that customizations can lead to access denied. What sort of customization can we check for? We can check whether any custom master page is used by the site collection, or if it's a modern site, then are there any style sheets? Are there any JavaScripts? All of these are these. Is there anything on the site, on that particular site, that that can give us some direction when we are isolating the problem? Okay, now let's look at some of the a few reasons that we have seen so far when we are working with access denied. These are the top 5 reasons. Not that this is not an exhaustive list, but it's there can be many more reasons, but I have just listed out top 5 reasons for anybody who gets access denied issue. Right, so the first one is the mismatch PUID. We spoke a bit about it when we were looking at user information list, because that is one of the metadata which also gets stored for a user. So PUID is nothing but a unique ID which is assigned to the user when they're created in the Azure AD, when they're added to Azure AD. And so what happens at times is, there could be scenarios when the user is removed or deleted and then recreated. And so if the user is recreated, even with the same UPN, they would still get a new PUID. And if that PUID, for whatever reason, does not get updated in the site collection, then the users may encounter access denied errors, right? And this can be easily fixed in 2 ways. Either we can remove the user from the user information list and give permissions again. But like I said, it's not recommended, especially if the user has many unique permissions, or they have permissions to resources that as an admin you're not aware about. So this is not so recommended. If it's a straightforward added to some group, you're aware about that as an admin, then this step can be taken. But if deleting from user information list is not an option, then the other way is to reach out to Microsoft, and we would take necessary action to fix the user's account on that particular site collection. Now, the second cause of the issue is that the user, it could be related to pages or web parts that are added on that particular page. There's some web part added. For example, there is a list web part which is added on the page, and maybe the user does not have access to that list. So it can also lead to access denied errors. And so it can be easily figured out. We can easily figure out if it's scoped to that page or not by having user access any other page, or create a blank page and see if user is able to access that blank page or not. It's just that we are isolating if it's a page specific issue or something else going on. The next is that we spoke about is to check if there is any customization, because if there are customization on the site, and let's say the user does not have access to those containers like libraries which have that customization, like custom style sheet or JavaScript, then that can also lead to access denied errors. And the fourth one is pretty obvious. It is when the user is trying to access a resource in SharePoint Online, to which they do not have access to, then obviously they would get access denied. And the last one, which is not so known or sought out reason, is that when the user is trying to access a page or a file or something which is in the checked out mode, and it does not have any published version, and it's checked out to some other user, that can also lead to access denied issues for the particular user. Now, this brings us to the end of permission module. And with that, let's talk about sharing. Well, sharing, because it is used almost by all the SharePoint Online users and almost every day in various capacities. So what is sharing and how different is it from permissions that we have been speaking about? Well, sharing is a modern solution to answer the need of sharing resources easily with both internal and external user. And the goal of introducing sharing is to enable users to give access to their content to to their peers or to other intended users. So as an end user, the users do not have to bother about permission levels or groups. All of these things they do not have to bother about. All they have to do is just click on share and just share away, just click on send and just share the resource away. So so an easy way to give permission with less number of clicks, right, with sharing. So it's pretty helpful, one of the ways which is very, very commonly used now for permissioning. Now let's look at what are the, before we look at details of sharing, let's look at what are the default sharing settings. Firstly, sharing is enabled for both internal and external user at tenant level. However, sharing can be controlled, so it can be, the settings can be easily changed at both tenant and site collection level. If the sharing is disabled at tenant level, then it cannot be, it would be disabled by default for all the sites as well. However, if it is enabled at the tenant level, then it can be made more restrictive at the site collection level. So if, let's say that I have set anonymous users as well enabled at the tenant level, sharing with anonymous users, then for any, let's say for a site collection, I want to store internal confidential information in that site. So it may be an intranet site. So I can disable anonymous access or even external sharing at that site level, site collection level, so that it is only accessible to the internal user. So it can be made more restrictive if it is less restrictive at the tenant level. It should be noted that enabling sharing can be done only by the site collection, only by the global administrators or the SharePoint service administrators only. Okay, so moving on, let's, when it comes to sharing, so there are two operations that can be performed when it comes to sharing. Either we can share the resource or we can just do copy link. So let's look at copy link. So when the user clicks on copy link, a sharing link would get generated. And this sharing link that gets generated, it depends on the default sharing link type. Now, there are 4 link types, as you can see the arrow going here. There are 4 sharing link types. We'll discuss more about it in the coming slide. But it's important to know that as you change the link type, so let's say now it is set to people in organization with the link can edit, then I can easily change it to, let's say, specific people, and this link would change accordingly. And then we can just copy that link. The other operation that can be performed is, share the resource. So when the user clicks on share, they would be presented with this dialog, wherein they can again change the sharing link type, give the email address of the user, and then just give a message and just click on send. Now, please note that if it's the external user to which the sharing link is being sent, then that link is just going to be a secure link. We'll discuss more about it, but clicking on send would just send an email to the user to whom the email is being sent, and that would include, the body of the email would include the link depending on the link type that was selected, and they can access it from the email, the resource that was shared with them. Okay, so let's talk about now sharing link types. Like we saw in the previous slide, there are 4, or we can look here as well. There are 4 link types that are available to us. So the first one is anyone with link. So anyone is the least restrictive. It allows link to be shared with anonymous users as well. And it's mostly preferred on the sites where administrator permits file to be shared over internet as well. And as you already know, it is not at all recommended for the intranet sites, right? Because any anonymous is allowed here. The next type is people in your organization, where resources can be shared only with the user within the tenant or the organization. And this is the recommended method for sharing when it comes to intranet sites, so that only internal users can collaborate on content within that site collection. The third sharing link type is people with existing access. This is pretty self-explanatory. So when any resource is set to this link type, it can be shared with the user who already had access to that resource. So let's say if somebody had access but they lost the link to it, so this option can be selected and that link can be shared with that existing user. And the fourth link type is specific people, wherein both internal and external users can be invited, can be sent the link. Like I already said, if it's an external user, then the link that would be sent to them is a secure link, which means they would have to sign in with their Microsoft account or work account or school account to be able to access the resource. It's different from anonymous access because they will have to sign in. Okay. Now let's look at various places where sharing links can be obtained. So if we just click on any file or folder and we go to details pane, we can see, it would present us with some information, like it would show us properties of that file, like name, title, or any other metadata. Then it would have a section called has access, wherein manage access can be clicked, and that would show us, the people who have access to that resource already. It would also show us the various sharing links that are already generated. So we can find all of that from the manage access. Now, next is about how can we figure out what are the sharing settings, or how can we change sharing settings for at the site level, right? So for that, just go to the gear button, go to site permissions, and then there it would show you the default groups who are part of it, as well as you would see change sharing settings, and there you would see 3 options. So the first one, it would allow both owners and members to share resources in the site along with the site itself, and people with edit permission level can share files and folders. They can't share site, the edit permission level, but they would be able to share files and folders. Owners and members can share the file, folder, and site as well. The next option is where owners, members, and people with edit permission can share files and folders, but only the site owners can share the site. So members cannot share the site. And the first one, members can also share the site. And the last one is where only the site owners can share files, anything in the site files or folders, only the site owners, not the members or the people with edit permission. Additionally, we can also set a control over here wherein we can decide as admins whether we want access requests to be sent for that site or not. And if it is set to enable, then we can choose who should get email for access requests so that they can take the necessary actions. Okay, now let's look at sharing settings from both classic and modern admin center. I'm quite certain most of you would have visited these sharing settings already. But let's look at top settings that usually people work with when it comes to sharing, like how can content be shared, who can share the content, can we if we want to set expiration on anonymous link, if we want to set what permission does anonymous link provide, whether it's just view and edit or view, edit and upload, restrict sharing links by domains, whether we want to allow guest users to share or not share. All of these are some common operations, sharing settings that can be done from both external, from both SharePoint modern or classic SharePoint Admin Center and modern SharePoint Admin Center. Additionally, all of these settings can also be performed using PowerShell. PowerShell can be used, and it has a lot of switches available for sharing, which can enable you to do specific settings. I would be sharing all of these switches for external sharing in the handout so that you know under which context you can use which switch. So I just wanted that we all can have a glance on various sharing settings that can be made, such as link expiration. We can see whether we can enable make it available for anonymous link. We can manage policy settings like such as block download. All of this we can select whether it should be password protected. All of these settings can be, these are just a glance, it is much more, but I just wanted to show you that what are the few settings which are commonly made when it comes to sharing links. All right, now let's talk about troubleshooting sharing issues. And here I just wanted to see if I can provide some guidance on how we work with sharing issues, right? So we try to identify first, the first thing first is that we try to identify what are the symptoms, like, what are the symptoms of the problem that's being reported. So what first thing is we need to figure what's really happening. Then we try to figure who is affected by that problem. Is it just that single user? Is it some few users, all the users? Whether this is occurring only on one site collections, it is occurring on multiple site collections, it is occurring on all site collections. By site collections, I mean maybe it's just the SharePoint site collections, team sites, or is it also happening for OneDrive site collection? And then we try to reproduce, we try to see if we can reproduce the same problem. Like, is the user able to reproduce the problem where they are already, like, in the same network or the same device? Are they able to reproduce the problem if they switch to another device or they switch to another network? Are they able to reproduce this issue on a different site collection, within in the same device or same network? All of these, basically we want to just figure whether it's a reproducible problem or not. And then we want to see if we can even record it. Those of you who have worked with Microsoft support, you would have found out that often support might ask you to run a diagnostic which will capture some steps. It's just to see what are the steps that were performed. It records a step to see what is the user really doing, so that we know what's happening. Then we try to figure out the cause of the issue. Now that we have worked with the symptoms, we want to see what's the cause of the issue. Whether and how do we figure the cause? We just try to see if it's the something with the sharing dialog, or if it's something that we can figure out from managed permissions. We try to figure or review tenant and site collection sharing settings or policies, see if it's the correct link type which is being shared with the user. And then we can also go to the extent to check with the admins if they can check for some changes that might have happened in audit clause just before the issue started happening. And then if we really want to do advanced troubleshooting, then we'll ask for Fiddler, or maybe browser trace such as F12, and see if we can figure out what's happening from these traces. Okay, so that's something that we would do. Basically, figure out what are the symptoms, and then try to find cause. And then once we have gathered them, then what would we look at? So we would basically try to figure from various perspectives. First, we would see from the sharing UI dialog, like what's enabled, what's disabled, what are the errors that are being shown? Is there any specific message? Is there a helpful? Or is there no error at all? Is it some issue with resolving the user in the sharing dialog? Is it for a specific set of user, all user in the sharing dialog? Then we look at the next set, which is like manage permissions interface. Does the link show up? Does the users have right access? Do they have this right permissions or rights to the link that they were trying to access? Are we able to see members showing up against that resource? Then we go check the tenant and sharing settings, what's enabled, what's disabled, is the site collection setting overriding the tenant setting, what type of policies, such as maybe some domains are allowed or not allowed, which are is sharing, can sharing be done only by members or anyone can do sharing. All of these type of settings we try to figure out from the tenant and site sharing settings. And then as an admin, you can also look for sharing report. This is something which is, I would say, maybe not so known, but maybe sharing report can be pulled for any site to figure what are the permissions that set of that user or the group of user have on a particular, whatever was shared with them. So how do we really access the sharing report? So let me talk first about OneDrive. So because it's pretty easy when it comes to OneDrive, you can easily figure this out. So all you have to do is go to OneDrive settings, then click on more settings. Once you're on more settings, click on run sharing report. And then it will ask you where you want to save the report within the default documents library, which is the OneDrive library. And then you can either save at the root, or maybe you can save it in some folder. And then once you open it, you would see all the, permissions listed out for against resources for users or groups. Now, when it comes to team or communication sites, it's sort of hidden. It's not so obvious. So what you have to basically do as an admin is go to site contents, where you see all your list and libraries and apps, and then go to site usage, which is on the top right-hand side. And then click on shared with external user. You will see the section under site usage. Just click on run report under shared with external user. And this too would prompt you with where you want to save it within the default share documents library. We all know there's a default shared documents library. It will ask you where you want to save it. Do you want to save it under the root of the library or under any specific folder, and then you can review the permissions. This may have some user identifiable information, so not recommended really to share with Microsoft, but you yourself as administrators can really go through it. Pretty helpful. If it's a large site, maybe a lot of things to review, but if it's a small site, not too much permissioning done, then something which you can find helpful to figure out what permissions were given to a user on which resource. Okay, so I thought maybe, I can just like permissions that we discussed, I can just list out some common sharing scenarios that we often come across in Microsoft. And so, we can just discuss how we can work with such scenarios. So let's say that the first scenario is that, the user's report, some user comes to you as an admin and says that sharing links cannot be created. So, okay, that's one statement, sharing links cannot be created. So then we try to gather symptoms. We just looked at it, that we should gather symptoms. So what are the symptoms here? The symptom is that it's occurring for all the sites, it's occurring for all the users, and it's basically you can see existing links that were generated in past maybe, but you are not able to generate any new links. So the troubleshooting that you can do is just go ahead and review tenant and site collection sharing settings. And probably you may find the cause of the issue is that the tenant settings would be preventing using sharing links. Maybe somebody might have changed it, and that's why it's not working anymore. So the obvious solution is to change it back so that tenant allows sharing links to be generated. Now, next scenario is I've just named it as type 1 for anonymous links that cannot be created. Now, there's a type 2 as well in the next slide, but in this type, anonymous link is disabled when we go look at the link types in the sharing or copy dialog, and we see that it's occurring on all the site collections. Now, the hint is on all site collections, right? Since it is on all site collection, we'll go review the tenant settings, and then we'll find that the cause of the issue, we may find that the tenant setting prevents external sharing. So all we have to do is just go ahead and change the tenant setting to allow anonymous links. Now, the next one is again for the same scenario, that anonymous link cannot be created, but there's a difference. Here, if you can see under symptoms, it says it occurs only on some site collection, right? Not all site collections. So here too, we will go and review tenant and site collection settings, and then we'll try to figure what's the cause. And we might figure that for those site collections that were impacted, their settings override the tenant settings, and they maybe were preventing external sharing. So there are two solutions: either reset the site collection setting to override site collection setting to inherit from tenant settings, or else just change the site collection setting to so that it allows anonymous link. So the next scenario is where it's reported, the user reports that no external user can be invited. So basically they are able to invite internal users, but not external users from the sharing dialog. So again, one more symptom could be that maybe all site collections are impacted. And then so you go ahead as an administrator to review the tenant settings, and you may figure that maybe the settings does not allow external users at all. And so obviously the solution is to enable external users at tenant level. And the last scenario that may come across is that specific external users cannot be invited. It's not all in the previous one, all in this, just a specific, just few users cannot be invited, or some users. And it's from the sharing dialog that you cannot invite them. And you figure that it's only some set of users. So you may go ahead and again review tenant and site collection sharing settings. And then it could be that maybe those external user domains. I hope this session is helpful. Thank you very much for watching this video.